Portion of Faith for today. This is Pastor Don and Donna Long. We're sure glad you've joined us for this discussion today as we continue to explore what the Jewish roots of our Christian faith are like, how they inform us, how they bring us to a really biblical enrichment of our faith. We begin to understand that not only was Jesus, his name is Yeshua, not only was he Jewish, the disciples were Jewish, the Bible is Jewish.
Mary was Jewish.
Mary was Jewish. Lots of traditions that we've lost somehow in the Gentilizing of the church. All along, Paul told us that we were grafted in. So we need to understand some of that. Over these past weeks, Donna, we've been talking about different celebrations and festivals of God. And we spent several weeks talking about Hanukkah in the richness of that tradition. Last week we talked about when was Jesus born. And we mentioned that the Bible...
That's a good one.
Yeah, the Bible doesn't tell us when, but we did some detective work, and on the basis of that detective work, looking at the Scriptures, it's clear that it obviously wasn't December 25th, wasn't in the winter. It more than likely was the fact that Mary conceived in Hanukkah, when the light of the world would have come in to conception, and that Yeshua was born during the Festival of Tabernacles. As John writes in his letter, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. That's more than likely the scenario. And that brings me to an understanding as we're looking at the holiday seasons in which we are, that there's a lot of man-made traditions.
Yes, there are.
And the question is, are man-made traditions necessarily wrong? What happens when we substitute man-made traditions for God's traditions? Is there anything we can look at in the Bible where we find men going their own way, setting up their own traditions, no matter how sincere, no matter how much they wanted to do it? What is God's attitude when that happens? And I think one of the clear stories in the Bible is what happened after Solomon died. You remember David was king, and then Solomon became the king that extended the empire to its greatest expansion ever. But after him, the kingdom split in two. And you'll find all this in the first book of Kings. And in chapter 12, we have an interesting dialogue that's going on here. Jeroboam is the king of the northern tribes. And he called those northern tribes Israel. And Judah and Benjamin, two tribes in the south, remained loyal to Rehoboam in Jerusalem. Now, this presented a problem because you have 10 tribes in the north, there's Jeroboam. You've got two tribes in the south who are loyal to David's line under Rehoboam. But according to Deuteronomy chapter 16, all the men were required from all of Israel, were required to go to Jerusalem to celebrate God's festivals in the temple.
That's right.
Now, that created a problem for Jeroboam, so let's find out what he did in 1 Kings chapter 12.
Yes, in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 26, starting at verse 26, it says, Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to the Lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. I guess we could know where he sought that advice from.
I guess so.
He said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin, and the people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there. Jeroboam built shrines on the high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 18th month, like the festival held in Judah, and he offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And at Bethel, he also installed priests at the high places he made there. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings.
Wow. So
Whoa,
here
that's loaded.
here we have Jeroboam saying, I know that the true worship of God, the way God ordained it, is for the men to go to Jerusalem and to
right.
honor God's holy days. But I can't have that. That's
right.
Their loyalty isn't going to be with me. And so verse 32 said that he instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festivals held in Judah.
That's right.
In other words, I'm going to give a substitute. We're not going to Judah. We're not going to go down there and celebrate God's festivals. I'm going to have one that is like that. You can come to my festival instead. And in verse 33, it says that he chose this as a month of his own choosing. Now, the King James Bible says it was a month which he had devised in his own heart and ordained a feast.
That's right.
So as the king, he devised in his own heart, this is how we should celebrate God's thing. The Amplified Bible says a date that he chose individually.
That's right.
A date he chose individually. The New Living Testament says a day that he himself had designated. It was a day he himself designated.
That's right.
And the Message Bible paraphrases it by saying, to top it off, he created a Holy New Year festival to be held to replace the one in Judah. This is called in the Bible, in 1 Kings chapter 15, the sin of an unsanctified festival.
That's right.
And it was so grievous, the sin of an unsanctified festival was so grievous that all future kings were measured by it.
That's right.
For example, in 1 Kings 15:34, it says about the king, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, walking in the ways of Jeroboam and in his sin, which he caused Israel to commit. The unsanctified festival, Donna, became a symbol of rebellion against God.
That's right. And then Jeroboam's name became a symbol of rebellion.
Absolutely.
And the Lord himself referred to him continuously in that light.
So he always
I wouldn't
called
want my
him
name to go down in history
as
associated with
rebellious.
that. That's right.
But what was the rebellion? Is God said, these are my days to celebrate.
That's right.
And the king said, no, we're going to celebrate my days.
That's
my.
That's right.
And so the bogus feasts, the bogus feasts and substitute form of worship at Bethel broke the spiritual link.
That's right.
And allowed Israel, like a rudderless ship, to drift away from the Creator.
That's right.
Think what happened. A nation serving God split in two, and this part of the nation, Israel, says, we're going to appoint our own days and we're going to worship the way we want to. I know what the Bible says, but this is what we're going to do. And that marked the beginning of Israel's drift away from
Gee, that's
God.
interesting. The 10 and the 2. Doesn't that sound like the spies? 10 were against him, had an evil report, and 2 followed what thus saith the Lord.
Absolutely. And the result of that was exile.
That's right.
It was exile. Now, you say, well, Pastor Donna, what, I know that sounds pretty terrible. I mean, there's what the Bible says, and Jeroboam said, I really don't care what the Bible says. Shut the Bible. We're going to make our own feast. We're going to do our own thing. Well, does that have anything to say about where we are? No matter how long we've done something, have we in the church done the exact same thing?
That's right.
And we're entering a season right now, we're in the middle of it, that is probably the most famous season in the world when the world thinks of Christians, and it's called Christmas.
That's right.
And yet Christmas was never observed by the early church.
No, it was not.
In fact, it wasn't until the 4th century that it really came into being. And all of this detachment from the festivals of God, and let's have our own festivals, began when Constantine became supposedly a Christian. Now, Constantine was a worshiper of the sun god.
Yes, he was.
And he had a vision, and he saw a sign that he thought was the cross of Yeshua. And so, therefore, he said, well, then I'm going to, in that sign, conquer, and now I'm going to become a Christian. And the Gentile leaders, see, it wasn't the Jewish leaders.
No, it was not.
The Jewish leaders of the church never would have fallen for this. But the Gentile leaders of the church, most of whom had come out of paganism
That's right.
themselves,
That's right.
were so excited that Constantine now made Christianity the official religion. How do you become an official religion? One day you're a pagan, now you're a Christian. See, one day you're a pagan, one day you worship the sun, S-U-N, now you worship well, we still say the sun, but we'll spell it S-O-N. And so Constantine brought into the church pagan practices.
Yes, he did.
One of the first things that Constantine did was drive a split between the Gentile church and her Jewish roots in Jerusalem.
That's right.
In fact, in the Council of Nicaea, which was supposedly a Christian council, Constantine drove that council to his conclusions.
That's right.
He's the one that said, we don't want to have anything to do with Jewish customs. Now, wait a minute. We've already talked about it. Leviticus 23, the 7 festivals of God aren't Jewish festivals.
No, they're not.
God says they're my festivals.
That's right.
In fact, we find out that, like tabernacles, it'll be celebrated throughout the millennium. It's going to be celebrated in the new world. Sabbath will be celebrated forever and ever and ever.
Celebrate it will be cut off.
That's right. The Bible is very clear.
That's right.
But Constantine came along just like Jeroboam, and he said, I don't care what that says.
That's right.
I'm going to set up days after my own liking.
That's right.
And so we come to the point where, I mean, you know, just about everybody everywhere celebrates Christmas. But how did Christmas come to be observed, and how did all the customs and practices associated with Christmas make their way into Christianity's most popular holiday? You know, I mean, December 25th, we already established.
We've addressed that.
No way was December 25th even close to the birth of Yeshua.
No, but how did it get to be the unanimously celebrated day?
Yeah, how did it get to be the day that we're going to celebrate?
That's right.
By the way,
who picked that day out?
the early church never even celebrated Christmas, never celebrated Yeshua's birthday, tabernacles or anything. They celebrated the feast, but they didn't celebrate that.
No, they did
so
not.
the question is, you know, how did these customs come into the church which are found nowhere in the Bible? They're not found there. You know, our Creator's view of this popular holiday is ignored.
That's for sure.
and is not even considered by most people. I mean, most Christians grew up in church, and well, surely it's in the Bible somewhere. We hear the stories, the angels, you know, Mary, and all these things, and it's all just part of this great pageant.
That's right. We just swallow it as truth, and we don't do the research ourselves to find out what does the Bible really say.
Well, you know, it's interesting because historians tell us that the Christmas celebration came from questionable origins. In fact, William Walsh, who wrote, he lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he summarized the holidays, Christmas practice this way, quote, "We remember that the Christmas festival is a gradual evolution from times that long antedated the Christian period. It was overlaid upon heathen festivals, and many of its observances are only adaptations of pagan festivals."
That's right.
How could pagan festivals become part of a major church celebration? And what were these heathen festivals that lent themselves to Christian customs, and how did they get in? You know, it was on or about December 21st, Donna, that the ancient Greeks celebrated what are known to us as the festivals in honor of Bacchus, the god of wine. And in these festivities, the people gave themselves to songs and dance and other revelries which frequently passed the limits of decency.
Yes.
And, you know, the Roman Senate, in fact, at one point, you know, kind of suppressed the celebration of December 21st because, I mean, it was becoming too popular. And you know, suppressing a holiday was unusual for the Romans. I mean, they were just like, let's gather everybody in, let's all see how we...
People.
They were party people. Let's see how we can get together. But interesting, the Romans had their own celebration of another day.
That's right.
The Saturnalia, that was held in honor of Saturn, the god of
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And their celebration began on December 17th, and it continued for 7 days.
That's right.
Now, are you getting a pattern here? Let me see. The Greeks are celebrating a pagan deity in December. The Romans are celebrating a pagan deity in December. And suddenly, you know, the Gentile pagan leaders of the church begin to say, let's celebrate the birth of Jesus on December. Here are some of the interesting traditions of the celebration of Saturnalia. Number one, all businesses were closed except those that provided food. Does that sound interesting? We're going to have a holiday and all businesses are closed.
That's right.
Gambling, drinking, and feasting were encouraged. People exchanged gifts with one another. And actually those gifts were called in Rome, they were called strini, from the vegetarian goddess Strinia, whom it was important to honor at midwinter.
That's right.
So we exchanged these strini, these gifts.
That's
well,
right.
that's a pagan ritual. And interestingly, in those pagan celebrations, candles and lamps were used to frighten away the spirits of darkness.
Yeah.
All of this happening in December. My. You know, during the days of the apostles, in the first century of the church, the early Christians had no idea what Christmas was.
Nope. Peter,
and over
Paul,
the
and
Oh yeah,
John,
this was
none
not
of
something
them.
they
They did not
celebrated.
celebrate that.
And over the following centuries, you know, these humanly devised observances, such as Christmas and later Easter, were gradually introduced into historic Christianity. And history shows that these new days were forcibly promoted,
That's right.
while the feast days were considered Jewish and were
That's right.
rejected.
That's
Isn't
right.
that interesting?
That's right.
Sounds to me,
It was a plot.
it sounds to me very much like what we just read about Jeroboam.
That's right.
I don't want God's feast.
Nope.
I'm going to set up my own feast.
That's
I don't
right.
want God's time. I want to set up my own time.
I'm going to do what's right in my own eyes.
I'm going to imagine. I'm going to come up with what I want to do. And the result was a destruction of the link between the people of God and God.
That's right.
And now we come to a period in the church when the church fathers say, we don't want the festivals of God.
No.
We want festivals we're